What advice would you give an aspiring investor that's about 12 months behind you?
Start raising money right away. Start
Mhm.
talking to people, building that up. Because the thing is too, when you're raising money with people, they're not going to just write you a check right then and there. You have to build a relationship with them over months. So you have to build that relationship with them. Also, with brokers, these brokers are getting calls all the time. If you really want to get in front of a product, you need to go there and meet them in person and take them at a lunch and walk some properties with them. And then lastly, just look at everything with many different lenses and be creative, because this is a very competitive space and you got to set yourself apart.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Four Oaks Capital. Very excited for today's show. It's the third of our first deal episodes, and we have Jonathan Barr on with us today, who's recently closed on a 71-unit apartment complex, soon to be a 72-unit in Norman, Oklahoma. So a little bit about Jonathan. He started his real estate career in the 2009 recession. He's acquired over 400 residential flips in the very competitive Los Angeles market. During that time, he was also involved in ground-up developments and repositioning of multifamily buildings. Also, during the last 10 years, he's created $22 million in profits for his investors with an average annual return of 38%. We'll get into a lot more of his bio. His full bio is going to be in the show notes. But that said, JB, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Doing well. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, always good.
Always good. So let's start with this. Let's start with your background. Give us, idea of, who you are, where you come from, and, what got you to where we are today.
Sure. Grew up in a real estate family, so it's basically in my blood. My mom's office was basically my daycare. And after the last recession, the Great Recession, couldn't find a job. My mom said, "Come work for us." But who wants to work for their parents? So I was a bit reluctant.
Yep.
Yeah. But I went ahead. I mean, when you're broke, you have to do things you don't want to do. And went to work for them. They had some investor connections and they were kind of rebuilding their business because they took a big hit during the last recession. And so we started going to foreclosure auctions, buying REOs, short sales, probates, you name it. We were buying 7-8 homes a month at one point, and I was kind of orchestrating that, having 2 people bidding at the courthouse steps, 2 people looking at the properties, and we did about 400 in those 10 years. Eventually those flips dried up. We got into some ground up development, also had a small portfolio of 2 to 4 unit properties in LA, and I did the management leasing for that. So I've kind of been in the trenches, and a little over a year ago, bought our first multifamily building, a larger multifamily building in Kansas City, and then just closed on the 71 unit about 5 months ago in Oklahoma City, in the city of Norman, which is within the metro, and just trying to do more of that, keep that going.
Recessions, we all know the Great Recession really hit real estate hard. And I think, Los Angeles, I was living in San Diego at the time, not too far away, but I think most people know what happened to the housing market. So it sounds like you were able to take advantage of that whole wave of foreclosures that came through. I mean, what was that market like? Were there a lot of other investors? Was it super competitive, or?
That's the thing. I think a lot of people were scared at the beginning that when we were going to the auctions, it was like 10 people there at the beginning. And then, later that would change. Eventually, it was like 100 people there. But at the beginning, there wasn't much. Deals are falling on my lap. We didn't have enough money to even buy these deals. Like there was so many deals at such good. I'll give you an example. One of the first deals we bought, I bought for $145,000 and sold it for $306, 36 days later.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And
did you do how much work did you guys do to that?
Probably put like 10,000. It was vacant too, so we didn't have to like evict anyone or do anything like that. But those are the kinds of deals that we were doing left and right. And that same house is probably worth $750 now.
Yeah. We bought our second investment property in 2009, and it was one that the previous owner bought at the peak. And this is, San Diego County. It's at the peak, they paid, I think, $455 for it. So I think they bought it in like 2005, 2006 time frame. and we picked it up for 305,000. So it was,
Yeah.
it was a good deal for us. Hard to time the bottom, but it slid a little bit more.
2009, you bought anything between 2009 and 2013, you're doing
Yeah.
amazing.
And it did extremely well. Now, one thing that was hard for us is getting that thing to cash flow, but we ended up selling, back up at 450 a couple of years later. But I mean, it just, it's something that I think a lot of people realize, but like you said, I think people get scared at that time. The housing market crashes, and there's a lot of fear. I think the fear is part of what makes the market crash and part of what keeps the crash going. But
Yeah.
you guys got in and you started buying stuff.
Yeah.
Now you talked about the money for it. Where did you guys raise money for these purchases, or how did you guys fund and purchase all this?
Yeah. So they had some previous partners that they had worked with before that basically gave us some seed money that we split. They would give us all the money for the deal. We would go to the auctions, buy it with that cash, and then we would split the profits from there, basically 50-50.
Okay.
But at one point, we were able to build up enough of our own capital, and we had a hard money lender that would basically lend us the money at pretty good rates for hard money like a week later. So we were kind of just recycling not a whole lot of money, but doing a lot with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one thing that I've always found incredible. The power of money. You can use the same dollar, recycle it, and keep on keeping on. Essentially, with a lot that you do.
Yeah.
So you did that for roughly 10 years. What made you decide to get into multifamily?
Well, I could back up a little bit. So during
Sure.
2011, 12, I bought 3 duplexes in amazing areas of LA. And then 10 years later, they had appreciated 400%. And I was looking at my equity on that property. On those properties, I was making probably 3% on the actual equity of the property. I was like, I know I could do better than this. This is basically like a
Savings
mutual
account.
fund.
Yeah.
So I started looking in LA and at like 10 units. But the thing about LA is we have rent control. And to get a tenant out of a rent control building that's paying $1,000 for a $2,500 a month unit, you have to pay them 50 grand to leave. So you multiply that by 10, that's $500,000 just to get everyone out of a building. And then you have to, because a lot of these buildings were built in the 20s, 30s, you have to gut them and basically rebuild them. So you put another $500,000, and there's just a ton of, and then permitting in LA is really challenging. So a ton of head damage. Or I could go out of state and buy something that's mostly turnkey and get about the same return without any of that head damage. And it was just like an easy decision for me. And
and that legislation, I happened to sell that condo that we bought about a year before that legislation came out. But we had one single tenant who was there for 8 years. And when I started looking at the details of that legislation and thought, oh my God, I'm so glad we sold when we did, because 50,000, that puts a big chunk into your profit margin if you've got to pay somebody $50,000 to move out. Prior to that law, 60-day notice. I just had to give her 60-day notice.
Yeah. In LA, we always had that rent control, and then before that. So it was always a common thing. But I mean, it's also a math problem at the end of the day. It's like, okay, I'm going to pay this person 50 grand. I'm going to put another 30 into it, and I'm going to get $1,100 more a month. So your return on that's probably close to 20%, but to get there, it's not easy. Yeah. And a lot of times when these sellers know that you can up the rent a lot, so they'll try to get you to pay for it to them, which is not really fair because you have to do a lot of work to get there. And so went out of state, and that first asset we bought in Kansas City has been performing really well, beating projections. And the Oklahoma City one is now beating projections by 67%. So not only are we doing it, but we're basically crushing it.
Nice. So let's talk about that deal in particular. Sure. First, let's talk about the team that you assembled for the Norman deal.
Yeah.
Who did you have involved with you, and what was that process like getting the right people in line?
Yeah. So basically, when we were first looking into Oklahoma City, we started contacting property managers first. We connected with a property manager that's also operator in the area and has about 1,000 units under ownership and management. He knew about the deal. We also connected with the broker separately that had control of the deal, but didn't want to work with us because she didn't know who we were and wanted to make sure she worked with someone that could close. But the broker had done a deal with this property manager before, so he kind of vouched for us. And because he vouched for us, she was willing to work with us at that point. It just was a good match because he had complexes nearby, so we could share staff and resources. He's about our age. He's building his business. We're trying to build our business. There was just a lot of synergies there that really worked well for us. And we may even partner with him on deals in the future. Maybe not. Who knows? The right opportunity would have to come up for that to work. So the property manager was key. Finding the right broker that was willing to work with us, that basically brought us a deal off market. And then also making sure we had the property inspector there that gave us a lot of vendor contacts and all that. So I would say property manager for the team was key.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the most essential person on your team, outside of your partnership, the general partners, that is by far the most important person on your team. And it sounded like that property manager basically was the catalyst for the deal. They vouched for you with the brokers. And I think every aspiring investor looks at the broker. The broker's a big hurdle. Everybody's got to get over, a set of hurdles just to be able to talk to brokers. And that property manager vouching for you gave you that in. So,
Yep. And then the other person on my team is obviously my partner, my brother, and I had worked with him in the previous business for about 8 years. So I know how he works. He's my brother. I could trust him with my life. So I that's the good thing about working with family is you could trust them. I mean, not everyone has family they could trust, but most people have family they could trust. And
you know them very well. Let's put it that way. So you know where you can trust them. But
they don't give, and they'll give it to you straight too. Which is important.
Yeah, that is important. Not holding punches when there's something glaringly obvious. Pointing out the elephant in the room. Sometimes family members are really good at that. So so let's talk specifically about the deal. 71 units. So tell me about the process of underwriting, analyzing, getting it under contract.
So I could back up a little bit. The property manager actually had the deal under contract before COVID, canceled because of COVID. And this same seller had another 140 unit deal that they were trying to sell as a package. So separate transactions, but he bought the other one and we bought this one at the same time and basically closed around the same day or so. So that's kind of was the catalyst for that. So it made the seller was only going to sell it if he could sell both of them at the same time.
Okay. So this was kind of a package deal where you and the property manager got together. I'll buy this one, you buy that one. Let's do this. Okay.
Yeah. We didn't commingle any funds or anything. It was completely separate transactions just from the same seller.
Okay. All right. Good. Now, as far as capital raise, what was the purchase price and what did the loan look like and how much capital did you guys have to raise for it?
Yeah. So we purchased it for $3.2 million, about $45 a door. The average rents were about $626, which was like a price to income ratio of about 1.4. And we try to usually be in about 1.3, 1.4 price to income ratio. A lot of times that's what it seems like those deals are working out for us. The property was in pretty good shape. They had new windows. We were just going to tidy up some of the outside, do new signing, branding, fix some a little bit of drainage stuff, that kind of stuff. So we're only putting about $150,000 into the exterior. So we put 25% down was the loan. We raised $150,000 in capex and about another $75,000 in reserves. So the total raise was $1,150,000. And most of that money actually came from a 1031 from a property that I sold in LA and a property that my brother sold in LA. And then the rest came from two friends. And I think part of the mistake we made on the deal was not opening it out to outside of our network sooner, because we did struggle to raise money from other people on the first deal, just because we were in the height of COVID. It was our first larger deal. They kind of wanted to see what we're doing. A lot of the people, our investors, are from LA, and the thought of going to buying real estate in Oklahoma seemed very foreign to them. So getting them used to that idea was challenging. I think the next time around will be a lot easier, but I think I was a little overconfident on our ability to raise on that first deal.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you got there, and it sounds like you said you would have been a little more active on the money raising earlier on had you to do it over again, right?
Yeah, and maybe I was a little bit lazy because I knew we had the funds to do it ourselves if we had to. So,
Okay.
but I could have made more of an effort early on.
Yeah. It's one of those things, I think necessity drives a lot of stuff, and good problem to have, knowing you have enough money to cover the entire cost to close and renovation budget is a good place to be, but
the sense of urgency is maybe not as much there, even though it is there, because if you spend all your money on one deal, then you have no money for future deals.
For next deals. Right.
Yeah.
Understand that totally. So now the 1031 exchange, how smooth was that process? I haven't talked very frequently with people who've actually done it. Can you tell us a little bit about the
I've
1031
done three
process?
in the last
Three
year.
of them. Okay.
Yeah. But so I sold March 20th of 2020, right when COVID was hitting. And I got an extension for my selection period, because I don't know if you remember back then, they extended those periods.
Just a blanket extension through, I think, July, if I remember right.
Yeah, till July 15th. So I had till July 15th now to select a property. So we opened escrow. I think it was either the very end of June or the beginning of July. The thing though, if your deadline didn't fall within a certain date period, it didn't get extended. So my close date didn't actually get extended.
Oh,
but
my selection date did.
Yeah.
Okay, so you still had a 180-day total clock. Your 45-day clock just got pushed.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
So I had to close by, I think it was like September 18th, and we closed this September 10th. So like 7 or 8 days before, basically a week before I was supposed to close. So it was pretty tight.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I honestly, I wasn't going to get into a deal I didn't want to get into. And I already accepted the fact that I may have to pay this tax. But the cool thing about it was a duplex that I lived in 2 out of the last 5 years with my wife. So I was able to write off 500,000 of that gain. And then the rest of that I 1031.
Okay.
So it wasn't too bad of a deal if for some reason I got stuck.
That 2 of the last 5 has really helped. And I mean, most people who listen know I'm active duty military. There's a clause in the IRS laws that say if you've moved out of a house because of active duty service, they extend that 2 of the last 5 to 2 of the last 15. So every investment property I've had has been a property that I lived in, moved out of, and rented. So I've been able to escape a lot of capital gains because of that. But
nice.
Yeah, I know, right?
You got to have some perks of the job, right?
Yeah. I mean, if the government's going to tell you to move every 2 or 3 years, the government can be nice enough to say, okay, well, we're going to give you a little bit of benefit, tax wise on the back end for that. But
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
for sure.
So 1031 exchange, you've done it, say 3 times in the last year. Escaping basically a large tax bill on the sale of each one.
Probably a couple $1 million in gains between the 3.
Nice. Yeah. So looking at, the highest bracket of income tax, you saved a lot of money is bottom line.
Yeah.
Have you ever computed how much money you saved through the 1031? When I say save, we know it's deferred, technically, but
probably close to $1 million.
Wow. Nice. Yeah, all day, every day. So, it's a good resource out there. There's been some chatter that the new president is going to take that out. And part of his new tax plan was to remove the 1031 exchange. But while it's in there,
it's been around for 100 years. They've tried to get rid of it time and time again, and they never succeed because they realize what economic benefit it has, and that's going to happen again. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing, and I try not to get political on the podcast, but part of the reason is to close up loopholes for the uber wealthy. But the fact is, it's not the super wealthy that are taking advantage of the 1031. More often than not, it's the regular Joes who bought a house, have owned
Yeah.
it for 5 or 8 years, and are just moving up. So anyway.
Yep.
So we talked about finding it, contract phase, anything else on the buying, contracting, raising capital before we move on.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to discuss is, so behind the property, there's a small little like stream or flood channel, whatever you want to call it. And when we went there, it was empty. It was dry because it was the summer when we were looking at the property. And I didn't think much of it. But after being halfway into the process, the bank was like, hey, this property's in a flood zone. And we had to get flood insurance. Luckily, we had given quite a big budget for our insurance. They were able to fit it within that budget that we originally have, but it was a surprise.
Yep.
So my recommendation for your listeners is, if you ever have a body of water of any kind, even if it's dry or doesn't seem like it could be an issue, just check. I mean, there's a FEMA map online. It's really easy to check.
It's free.
And it's free. There's different levels of flood zones too that can affect the insurance and the cost of that.
Yeah, and the other thing that we found out, and we didn't do this till too late in the process on our first couple of deals, is while you're underwriting, you can talk with an insurance agent.
Yep.
And they can do a lot of this for you. I mean, they can do a real quick down and dirty, here's what we anticipate your insurance is going to cost. And they're happy to do that for you for free, because if they're providing you that service, once you close on it, you're likely to go with them anyway. So it is something, it is a resource.
As long as they give you the best quote. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and for the most part, they're competitive too, because a lot of these agents are just going out to the market and they're calling the national companies,
Yeah. They're all going to the same people.
Yeah. There's 5 or 6 really big commercial carriers that most policies are underwritten with. So definitely
I would say get a quote before you even get it under contract if possible.
We got bit on one of ours where, we didn't have a very good insurance estimate going in. This was also our first deal. And during the underwriting, when we finally got the insurance, policy coming out, it was a substantial jump. And so that really impacted. Fortunately, we had a lot of meat on the bone and a lot of, margin for error in our underwriting, but it closed that gap in our margin for error really quickly. And incidentally, we own 8 properties now, and we were able to put them all under, one single policy with a bunch of riders. And we ended up saving a lot of money. We ended up getting that money back as far as, what we had originally underwritten to versus where it's at right now. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the insurance part. Any other big hurdles before closing?
I mean, just get a good discovery. The property used to have a pool. And so there was a pool room with a sauna that we're now converting into a studio room. The sauna is going to be the closet, and some other storage utility closet. It's going to be the bathroom. So that's another $650 a month in added rent, which if you multiply that by a cap rate is over 100,000 in value right there, straight out the gate.
Yeah, that's huge. Adding units. If you can put, one more tenant in one more unit, that's a big deal. It's one of those things that's asymmetric returns, is, another big podcaster likes to call it. But
and then also if you have big 1 bedrooms, you could maybe turn them into 2 bedrooms, and that could be worth it if you don't have to do anything too structural.
One of the apartments we have has this weird shotgun style bedroom where it has 2 bedrooms, but you have to walk through the first bedroom to get to the second bedroom.
Yeah.
We put up a wall and moved a door and turned it into a true 2 bedroom, which,
so you put a hallway in basically.
Yeah, essentially. Well, we actually turned the first bedroom in the shotgun into the living room and put a wall up and closed off the living room and turned the former living room into a bedroom. So, now you have 2 private bedrooms. You still have the living room, you still have the kitchen, and we were able to raise rents significantly just by closing that off. We were previously marketing it as a 1 bedroom, and that allowed us to market as a true 2-bedroom.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people are excited about the fact of, having their roommate walk through their bedroom,
No,
to get to theirs in the back. But
definitely not.
But all right. So what's next for you and your team?
I mean, we're looking for other deals. I think people aren't scared of COVID anymore and are acting like COVID doesn't exist and paying crazy prices. So it's been pretty challenging. And we were actually under contract on a deal that we had to unfortunately cancel because the owner misrepresented the size of the units by 25%.
No big deal. Just 25%.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
25%. Went from 800 square feet average to 600 square feet average, which is pretty huge.
Yeah. That's a decent size 1-bedroom to a really small 1-bedroom apartment is what that is.
Yeah. Basically, we almost like studio size at that point.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And we asked for a reduction. Obviously, he wouldn't budge. So we unfortunately canceled, and we're going to lose about 15 grand on that deal because of inspection fee. We did the appraisal. The guy didn't go out to do the appraisal, but the thing is, even if you order it, they usually do all the work before they go to inspection.
Some costs. Right.
Yeah. And then our attorney's fees. So you add that up, it's somewhere in the 12 to 15K range of just on costs.
Yeah. And that's why it's called risk capital, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I guess we'll write it off on our taxes.
I know, right? Yeah. Another tax write-off for you. All right. So one question that I usually ask early on, but I didn't, what's your big burning why? What's your motivation for this?
Obviously, in my family, I have a daughter. I have another daughter on the way. And so being able to provide a good life for them is important. I'm not trying to make the biggest portfolio of real estate out there. I just kind of have like my cash flow target goals. And we were talking about earlier, I want to build a house by a lake in a forest and be able to be outdoors a lot and kind of never sit on my butt and not do anything, but have the option of basically doing whatever I want when I want.
So it's lifestyle. You want to be able to live a lifestyle that you choose.
Yeah. And I don't want to have $1 billion portfolio because even if you have good systems in place, there's still a lot of stress that goes on.
Still a lot of work. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Nice. So here's a question that, I think is probably the best question that'll last the whole time. What advice would you give an aspiring investor that's about 12 months behind you?
Like I said, start raising money right away. Start talking to people, building that up. Because the thing is too, when you're raising money with people, they're not going to just write you a check right then and there. You have to build a relationship with them over months. Also on this raise, we realized like, holy crap, we're not going to be able to raise what we thought from the people that we know and started opening it up to other people. And we're like, hey, we have this deal now. And they're like, whoa.
Wait a second. Who are you again? Yeah.
Yeah. You're asking me for all this money right now. So you have to build that relationship with them. Also with brokers, these brokers are getting calls all the time. If you really want to get in front of product, you need to go there and meet them in person and take them at a lunch and walk some properties with them. And then lastly, just look at everything with many different lenses and be creative because this is a very competitive space and you got to set yourself apart in some ways. And like we just talked about those things of adjusting units, adding bedrooms, all that kind of stuff is thinking outside the box and making things work that might not work to someone else looking at it.
Nice. Yeah. A lot of golden nuggets there. And, I think everybody who gets their first deal, across the finish line says something similar, start raising money, because that ends up being, the toughest part for a lot of people. But, all right. So last question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
I'm most active on Twitter, just JB2 Investments on Twitter, or you look up my name, or you can go to our website, JB2Investments.com. I also have an ebook about real estate and taxes, JB2Investments.com/lower.
All right. Nice. And as always, we'll have all the links to those in the show notes. So if you're listening, just tap, swipe, and tap again, and it'll whisk you away to whichever one of those you want to head out to. So, hey, JB, this has been great reconnecting and talking with you again. It's been far too long. I appreciate you coming on the show today, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. And one last thing too,
Yeah.
if there's any aspiring investors out there that just want to have a chat or send me an email, I'm always happy to help as well.
Awesome.